would say that if you feel like you can't allow your worldview to be threatened, that you are wrong in the worldview that you have. So, a lot of people have something specific that they've kind of honed in on and they're obsessed with it. And it could be a video game that's your one and only favorite game. It could be that you've decided that a certain ball team is the very best of the best. It could be something like a religion or a political view or something too, something more important. But ultimately, if you have this idea that there's one thing that's absolutely right and anything that conflicts with that must be wrong, then you're going to really struggle if you want to have a balanced perspective of life. Because the truth is that a good, balanced perspective on life is going to accept that a diversity of different ideas are all worthy of being considered and should be analyzed in a rational way and then accepted only to the degree to which they are rationally proven to be true. And it's also important to just um, not really be entirely certain how true something is, because you can think something's right and realize after a while it's not true. Because our idea of truth is also subject to our interpretation. Maybe truth is itself absolute, but our ability to accurately interpret truth is limited by our own faulty understanding. So we should be humble and sober to not be too certain that we're right. Now, I was raised in a rather Christian sort of a environment, and so I was a teenager who believed in just the normal interpretation of a Christian set of teachings. And I remember I started to watch some science fiction television shows like Star Trek and Star Wars and different things. And Star Wars had this teaching of the Force. It was this idea that there was a universal force that existed within all living things, and it was sort of like a New Age interpretation of God, I guess, suitable for a Star Wars universe, but it also felt surprisingly like a betrayal of Christian teachings. And then, of course, Star Trek, which was all about traveling around and exploring space, and it's a very, I guess, a scientifically progressive theme in that show. And the more I thought about these things, the more I really had the feeling that they challenged my worldview when it came to religious beliefs. And eventually, as time went on, I came to the realization that I couldn't just hold one view as absolutely right and then rule out everything else that didn't match up with it as false. So I became an agnostic, someone who believes that there are things we don't know. We should have a sense of moral duty in life and a sense of humility in the face of unknown things. And there may indeed be a higher power of some kind that rules and guides our existence. And yet, we don't really know what that is. And if you look at the teachings of religion and the teachings of science, you'll find that ultimately both concede that they do not know the true nature of God or of the universe. Now, today I believe that there's value to be gained from many different ideas and points of view. And I can equally and at the same time take pride in Christian values, things that you would have learned in Sunday school about how you should live and how you should treat other people. And I can also respect the liberal values of scientific progress and an open mind to the unknown. I don't view those as competing ideas or as things which are in conflict with each other, because I don't believe that any one of them is absolutely more important, that there's one voice which I should listen to and everything else should be tuned out. I think truth is something we should try to find. And if that means that something has to be acknowledged as false, then we should just own up to it. But that doesn't mean that we have to throw things out that are good either. Let's think about Santa Claus. If you're a child, maybe you believe in Santa Claus. You believe he's a real guy that comes down the chimney. And then you realize, okay, the laws of physics and logic suggest that this is not actually how it works. Well, do you have to completely forsake the good things about Santa Claus as a legend? No, you really don't. There's nothing wrong with saying, I still believe in Santa Claus, in a way. I believe in the values that Santa Claus represents, of giving and of magic and of wonder and of Christmas vibes and all of those things. All those things that used to make Macy's special and Miracle on 34th Street or whatever special. You can hang on to that. You don't have to give that up just because you realize that Santa Claus is not actually physically flying around the world in a magic sleigh and squeezing through your chimney in the middle of the night. So, believing in things is important, but being an absolutist to the point where you believe that you should have faith in one thing at the expense of all other things and suspend all disbelief, that's not ideal. Of course, the other side of it is, if you're rather ecumenical in your beliefs, you should also respect people who do have different beliefs, perhaps more specific targeted beliefs than you do. If I go into a church and I say, hey, I believe, that there's truth to be found in all sorts of different ideas, and, my views don't align with Christianity and exactly, and all of you are wrong for believing this particular way because I don't believe that way anymore. Well, is that helpful? No, that's destroying culture. It's destroying something that is good, because it's like going to that child that just has a certain sense of faith that Santa Claus is going to be there, and you go to that little child who put out milk and cookies for Santa Claus and went to bed happy, and you say, oh, let's sit down and have a real long conversation about how Santa Claus doesn't exist. All right. I mean, is that really helping? No, it really isn't helping. The kid's probably going to figure it out on their own. And if the kid grows up and lives their whole life and never manages to figure out on their own that Santa Claus is not real, I don't know. Maybe they should just be allowed to believe it, because they probably, they're probably missing a little bit of their faculties. I don't know what to tell you. But the fact is, people should not be prohibited or punished or looked down on for having a unique way of processing and discovering faith in their lives. People will have unique political positions on things. They'll have unique religious views. They'll have all sorts of variation in the way they look at life. And we all do. Every single one of us has something that is our lens through which we see the world. And from my perspective, I think if you want to embrace the idea of philosophy, you also have to embrace the idea of thought. And if you embrace the idea of thought, you have to think about a lot of different things. You can't just have total tunnel vision and only look at one particular thing and then rule out everything else. So I've explained my views, and yet I think it's also just as important to respect the importance of other people not having that view. Because you can't have the yin without the yang. You can't have young people without old ones. You can't have reason without faith. There's a need for every sort of people in the world that exist. And when we start wanting to change people because we think that we're onto something and therefore everybody else should have the same opinion, that's toxic, it's harmful, it's not the way to go. Imagine if you went to the hamburger joint and you said, oh boy, Chinese food is so good. Everybody should be having Chinese food, and let's, prohibit people from eating hamburgers because Chinese is so much better. That's not going to help. Imagine if you tried to eliminate, Chinatown, and you say, oh, well, everybody should just mix together and share the same ideas. Well, what about the people? How do you preserve that culture if you are trying to eliminate the people who hold as dear the original unadulterated tradition of said culture? Like, you need real legitimate people who are living that culture if you're going to preserve it. So we shouldn't be destroying culture in the name of progress. We shouldn't be fighting people for differences because we think that we're progressive. These are not good attitudes to have. And I think there's a lot of that, maybe virtue signaling of people who think that they would like to kind of spread the good news to everybody. And it really happens in many different ways and from many different angles. It happens in the, the educated community, if you will, people who are thinking, oh, I know a lot, and you're stupid for believing in things that I don't believe in. You should think like I do. And then there's religious people that are out there saying, well, you should have this sense of faith and believe in these particular things because, if you believe in this stuff, your eternal life will be perhaps secured or something like that. Everyone has this idea, gee, I sure would like to make everybody see things the way I do. And I don't think that that's healthy at all. I think it's important if you want to grow as an individual and that's something you're thinking about, then my advice would be that you have room to entertain a wide variety of different ideas and celebrate them without trying to dilute them. But also do have room for more than just one. And that can feel paradoxical because we tend to want to just, figure out what's that one best thing. But really, we're best when we combine all of those things together. And we say that everything as a combined assortment is best when it comes to ideas. But a combined assortment of ideas does not mean a total combination of all ideas into one idea. It's to say that separation is valuable because it creates distinct things, and we should all encourage people to be separate in a way that's respectful and not try to get people to just mash themselves all together into one single generic form that doesn't have any convictions, that doesn't have any room for differences, that's just a melting pot. We should embrace multiple extremes to a point without being extremist in our interpretation of them. And that's I guess that's hard. It's hard because when you believe something, you want to share it with others. And when you have things that are seemingly opposing beliefs, it's very difficult to just accept them at face value, let them be cards that exist in the same deck, and don't try to say, well, here's the one that's accurate, and here's the bits and pieces of each one that don't fit together, and kind of have this surgical approach of how you're going to homogenize everything. It's difficult to be progressive without being oppressive of people who you don't think are progressive enough. And I guess maybe it's an eternal struggle to try to figure out how do you work through this. And the only way I know is you have to keep on going back to the drawing board and reminding yourself that, yeah, life is filled with many incongruities. It's filled with many conflicts. And about the best thing we can do is to just say that's okay, and then leave it at that. I don't think I really have anything more to say on this, other than it's okay to have differences. It's even necessary to have differences. And yet, if you really want to be a well-rounded person, you probably are going to have to learn how to embrace many different ideas and not just fixate on one. And I think I have to escape these mobs, because log gathering gear is not the best type of gear for fighting, and it turns out. In any case, thank you very much for watching.